أهلا بالجميع. طيب فكروا معي. أهلا بالجميع. طيب فكروا معي للحظة. عالم بدون تطبيقات لغات وبدون إنترنت، وحط السفر مش بالسهولة اللي نعرفها اليوم. السؤال هو كيف كان الناس يتعلمون لغة جديدة في ذاك الوقت؟ اليوم رح نرجع بالزمن عشان نكتشف هذه الطريقة القديمة والمدهشة جدا لتعلم اللغات.
يعني اليوم الأمر بسيط جدا، نفتح أي تطبيق ونبدأ نتعلم. لكن للحظة، قبل كل هذا كيف كانت الأمور؟ كيف شخص مثل شكسبير تعلم اللاتينية؟ أو كيف تمكن العلماء في أوروبا من قراءة النصوص اليونانية القديمة؟ الجواب يكمن في طريقة مختلفة تماما عن كل اللي نعرفه.
إذن أول محطة في رحلتنا هذه هي ما يسمى بالطريقة الكلاسيكية، وهذه مش أي طريقة، هذه هي الطريقة اللي سيطرت على تعليم اللغات لقرون طويلة.
طيب ليش سموها الكلاسيكية؟ ببساطة لأنها نشأت لهدف واحد ومحدد: فهم النصوص الكلاسيكية. نتكلم هنا عن لغات مثل اللاتينية واليونانية، لغات الأدب والفلسفة والعلوم لآلاف السنين. الفكرة أنهم ما كان في متحدثين أصليين يتكلموا معهم، كل اللي كان موجود بين إيديهم هو النصوص المكتوبة.
وهنا نجي للنقطة الجوهرية، للاختلاف الكبير. الهدف من التعلم ما كان أبداً الشيء لنفكر فيه اليوم. الهدف ما كان التحدث.
اسمعوا هذه الجملة: الهدف الأساسي هو القدرة على قراءة أدب اللغة. هذه الجملة حرفياً هي مفتاح كل شيء. الموضوع ما كان عن المحادثات اليومية أو طلب فنجان قهوة، لا، كان أشبه بتمرين للعقل، طريقة للوصول إلى حكمة القدماء مباشرة من المصدر. تعلم اللغة كان تدريباً فكرياً بحتاً.
وهنا فيه تشبيه جميل جدا يوضح الفكرة. اللغة عبارة عن مبنى، المفردات هي الطوب، والقواعد هي الإسمنت اللي يمسك هذا الطوب ببعضه. المنطق كان كالتالي: لو أعطينا الطالب كمية كافية من الطوب، يعني قوائم كلمات طويلة ومملة، وكمية كافية من الإسمنت، يعني قواعد نحوية صارمة جدا، فهو راح يقدر يبني أي جملة بشكل مثالي. على الأقل هذه كانت النظرية.
طيب كيف كان شكل الفصل الدراسي اللي يطبق هذه الطريقة؟ خلونا نتخيل أننا جالسين في واحد من هذه الفصول الآن. تخيلوا معي فصل دراسي شبه صامت. المعلم هو المصدر الوحيد للمعلومة، هو السلطة المطلقة. يتكلم بلغة الطلاب الأم ويشرح القاعدة تلو الأخرى، ما في أي مجال للمحادثات العفوية أو حتى للخطأ. الهدف واحد فقط: الحصول على الترجمة الصحيحة كلمة بكلمة. اللغة الجديدة ما كانت تستخدم للتواصل أبداً، كانت تستخدم فقط للتحليل والتشريح.
كل التركيز كان على مهارتين فقط: القراءة والكتابة. ليش؟ لأن هذا كل اللي يحتاجه الشخص عشان يقرأ الأدب. طب والنطق؟ ليش يهتموا فيه وهم أصلا ما راح يتكلموا؟ ومهارات الاستماع نفس الشيء. اللغة المحكية، لغة الشارع، تم تجاهلها بالكامل. كانت تعتبر نسخة أقل شأنا من اللغة الأدبية الكاملة اللي في الكتب.
الدرس كان له روتين صارم ومحدد. الخطوة الأولى: ترجمة نص أدبي قديم كلمة بكلمة. ثانياً: الإجابة على أسئلة للتأكد من فهم النص. بعدها يجي الجزء الصعب: حفظ قوائم لا نهائية من المفردات والقواعد النحوية عن ظفر قلب. وأخيراً تطبيق كل هذا في تمارين كتابية مثل ملء الفراغات. الموضوع كان أقرب لحل معادلة رياضية منه لتعلم لغة حية ونابضة. طيب السؤال المهم: هل هذه الطريقة كانت فعالة وناجحة؟ حسناً، الجواب معقد شوي. خلونا نشوف الإيجابيات والسلبيات. من جهة، هذه الطريقة كانت تجبر المتعلم على فهم بنية اللغة بشكل عميق جدا، وهذا شيء إيجابي. لكن الجانب السلبي كان كارثيا. كانت النتيجة طلاب يقدرون يترجموا أعقد النصوص الكلاسيكية بشكل مثالي، لكنهم ما يقدروا يطلبوا كوب ماء. كانوا يتعلمون كيف يبنوا جملا صحيحة من ناحية القواعد، لكنها جمل غريبة آلية كأنها من روبوت. والسبب؟ لأنها ببساطة ما استخدمت أبدا في محادثة حقيقية. إذن ما الذي تبقى من هذه الطريقة؟ ومع كل هذه العيوب، ليش اختفت شعبيتها مع مرور الزمن؟ هنا بالضبط تكمن المشكلة كلها. الجمل اللي كانوا يتعلموها قد لا تكون مناسبة أو ذات معنى في مواقف الحياة الحقيقية. يعني ممكن شخص يحفظ كل قواعد اللغة، لكن هذا ما يعني أبدا أنه قادر على التواصل. هذا الانفصال التام بين المعرفة النظرية على الورق والاستخدام الفعلي في الواقع هو السبب اللي أدى في النهاية لثورة حقيقية في عالم تعليم اللغات.
إذن شفنا كيف كانت الطريقة الكلاسيكية تتعامل مع اللغة وكأنها آلة يتم تفكيكها، لكن اللغة مش آلة، اللغة كائن حي يتنفس ويتطور. طيب، إذا كان حفظ القواعد عن ظهر قلب مش هو الحل، أجل كيف صرنا قادرين فعلا على التحدث مع بعضنا البعض؟ هذا هو السؤال الكبير اللي راح يكون محور شرحنا القادم.
All right, today we're going to do a little time traveling. We're diving into one of the oldest, most influential ways of teaching a foreign language, and believe me, its story is absolutely key to understanding how we all learn today.
I mean, think about it. Before you could just tap an app on your phone or book a flight, how on earth did people do it? For centuries, the answer to that question was pretty much dominated by one single, very powerful idea.
And here it is, the grammar translation method. Now, its original name was the classical method, and honestly, that name tells you everything you need to know. Its whole purpose was to teach classical languages. We're talking Latin and Greek. And that origin story, it's the secret to understanding its very unique and sometimes kind of strange approach.
So first up, let's really unpack what this method was all about. Because it wasn't about ordering a coffee in Rome or chatting with locals in Athens. No, its goals were, well, they were a lot more academic.
Okay, this is the part that just turns everything we think about language learning completely on its head. The main point of this method was not to learn how to speak the language at all. Just let that sink in for a second.
So, if the goal wasn't speaking, then what was it? Well, the answer was actually pretty simple. It was all about reading literature. The entire point was to get access to what was seen as the highest form of culture.
This quote really hits the nail on the head. It gets right to the core philosophy. The whole reason for memorizing all those grammar rules and endless vocabulary lists was so you could unlock the great literary works of another culture. It was about reading texts, not talking to people.
And you can see here, the priorities were crystal clear. Everything, and I mean everything, was about the written word. Reading and writing were number one. Speaking, pronunciation, they were barely even an afterthought. They were focused on the formal, literary language you'd find in a book, not the stuff you'd actually hear people say on the street.
So how did they even think about language itself? Well, this analogy from our source is perfect. They saw language as a building, a big, grand edifice. The vocabulary words were the bricks, and grammar rules, that was the cement that held it all together in this perfect, logical structure.
Okay, so with that philosophy as our foundation, what did it actually feel like to be a student in one of these classrooms? Let's pull back the curtain and take a look at the day-to-day.
The classroom dynamic was, super traditional. The teacher was the undisputed authority, the one with all the knowledge. And the students, their job was to be passive, to just sit there and absorb and memorize the information. And get this, almost all of the class was taught in the students' own native language, not the one they were supposed to be learning.
The learning process itself was really deductive. It followed this very strict three-step pattern. First, the teacher gives you a grammar rule. Second, you memorize that rule. And third, you apply it to a bunch of examples. There was zero room for discovering things on your own. It was all about memorization and application.
The absolute bread and butter of the classroom was translation. Students would get a chunk of some difficult piece of literature, and their main job was to translate it, word for word, right back into their own language.
And after all that translating, you weren't done yet, not by a long shot. The next step was to answer a bunch of questions about the passage. And these questions were designed to prove that you really understood the text, inside and out.
Then came the drills. So many drills. Fill-in-the-blank exercises were an absolute classic. They were designed to just hammer home all the specific vocabulary and grammar points you just seen in the reading.
And to top it all off, students would often have to find opposites and similarities, antonyms and synonyms, for words in the text. So you see the pattern here, right? Every single activity was about dissecting a piece of writing.
Now look, a method doesn't stick around for centuries without having some things going for it. So let's take a fair, balanced look at what the grammar translation method actually did well, and, of course, where it really fell short.
So here's the big trade-off. On one hand, the method was obsessed with accuracy, and translating something is a pretty clear way to see if you understood it. But the downsides were huge. You could learn to write a perfectly grammatical sentence that no native speaker would ever actually say. Real communication and speaking skills, they just got left in the dust. So right now you might be thinking, okay, that's a neat history lesson. but it all sounds so ancient. But here's the thing. Its influence is absolutely everywhere, even today. Let's talk about the legacy of this method.
Just take a second. Think back to your own language classes in school. Memorizing long vocabulary lists, stressing out over grammar tests. Does any of that ring a bell? Because this is its real legacy. That focus on memorizing verb charts, the anxiety over written exams, that core belief that if you just know all the grammar rules, you know the language, these are the ghosts of the grammar translation method, and they still haunt classrooms all over the world.
So we'll end on this thought. This old method really forces us to ask a huge question about what it even means to learn a language. At the end of the day, what's the real goal? Is it to be perfectly accurate, or is it to actually connect with another human being, even if you make a few mistakes along the way? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this one.
TEFL Course Revised Grammar Translation Method. TEFL Course Revised Grammar Translation Method, GTM, the classical method main purpose. GTM aims to help students read and translate classical literature, Greek and Latin classics, by focusing on grammar rules and the vocabulary of the target language. Characteristics. 1. Deductive grammar teaching. Teachers explain grammar rules first, then provide examples. Students memorize the rules and apply them. 2. Reading and writing focus. There is greater emphasis on these skills, with less focus on listening and speaking. 3. Preference for literary language. The method prioritizes written literary language over spoken communication. 4. Mental discipline. Studying grammar and vocabulary is believed to contribute to intellectual development. 5. Memorization and translation. Grammar rules, vocabulary, and verb conjugations are taught through memorization and translation into the student's mother tongue. 6. Use of the mother tongue in class. The native language is predominantly used for explaining grammatical rules and for literary translation. Role of the teacher in GTM. 1. The teacher takes an authoritative and traditional role in the classroom. 2. The native language is used for teaching and communication. 3. The teacher provides immediate feedback by correcting students' errors. 4. The teacher teaches the target language through deductive grammar explanations, text translation, Classroom interaction. Teacher-student interaction. The teacher dominates the classroom, with limited student participation. Students listen, take notes, and respond to questions. Minimal student-student interaction is observed. Role of the student in GTM. Students primarily take on a passive role as recipients of knowledge rather than active participants in communication. Student roles include 1. Translating texts from the target language into the native language. 2. Memorizing vocabulary and grammatical rules. 3. Reading literary texts to develop comprehension and linguistic accuracy. 4. Focusing on written proficiency rather than speaking or listening skills. Techniques in GTM. 1. Translation of literary passages from the target language into the mother tongue. 2. Explanation of vocabulary and grammar structures found in the passage. 3. Reading comprehension questions. O. Literal questions to check recall. O. Inferential questions to assess deeper understanding. 4. Fill in the blank exercises using new vocabulary or grammar rules. 5. Identifying synonyms and antonyms with sentence creation for each. 6. Composition writing based on the topic of the passage. Examples of techniques used in the grammar translation method, GTM. 1. Translation of sentences. Students translate literary passages from the target language into the native language. Example. Translating the first chapter of Hamlet into Arabic while ensuring grammatical accuracy. Checkmark, a literary passage, rephrased for clarity. Formatting made consistent. 2. Grammar explanation. The teacher explains grammar rules explicitly before applying them. Example. Teaching, will, by stating the rule, will plus base verb, e.g., I will go to school. 3. Vocabulary lists. Students memorize vocabulary lists along with the native language equivalents. Example. Learning a list of English words with Arabic translations, such as table. 4. Reading comprehension. Students read a passage and respond to questions that test understanding. Example. Reading a short story and answering questions on the main idea and details. 5. Fill in the blank exercises. Students complete sentences using correct grammatical forms. 5. Fill in the blank exercises. Students complete sentences using correct grammatical forms. Example. She ___ go to school every day. Right pointing arrow, goes. 6. Synonyms and antonyms. Students identify words with similar or opposite meanings from the reading text, then use them in sentences. Example. Synonyms for happy, joyful, cheerful. Antonyms: sad, gloomy. 7. Composition writing. Students write essays using the vocabulary and grammatical structures learned. Example. Writing a short essay about my favorite hobby, using accurate sentence structures. Advantages of the grammar translation method, GTM. 1. Retention of foreign expressions. The use of translation and repetition helps fix foreign language expressions in students' minds more effectively than other methods. 2. Strong grammatical foundation. Students develop a solid understanding of grammar rules and sentence structures. 3. Improved reading and writing skills. The method emphasizes accuracy in written language and enhances vocabulary knowledge. 4. Focus on accuracy. Memorization of vocabulary, grammar rules, and verb paradigms ensures linguistic precision. 5. Translation as a comprehension check. Translating into the native language helps verify whether students have understood the target language content. Disadvantages, limitations, of the grammar translation method, GTM. 1. Lack of real-life relevance. Sentences from classical texts often lack meaningful application in everyday communication. 2. Neglect of speaking and listening skills. The method provides minimal opportunities to develop oral fluency or auditory comprehension. 3. Minimal classroom interaction. Communication is mostly teacher-centered, leading to reduced student engagement. 4. Limited support for struggling learners. Students who are less intellectually inclined may continue making repeated errors, especially at advanced levels. 5. Poor oral fluency. Since the method does not prioritize speaking, learners struggle to use the language fluently in real-life situations.